Hi there, and welcome to Ian's Engage channel. I'm Ian. In previous videos, I've shown how I've fitted DCC decoders to various locos from various manufacturers, such as Graham Farish, Dapple, Revolution Trains, and Sonic models. In this video, I'm back with a Graham Farish loco, and will show how I fitted a decoder to their Class 24. The Class 24 in question was a DCC ready version in BR Blue with a product code of 372-975A. Okay, so before fitting the decoder, I ran the loco on DC, so I had some results to compare to after the decoder was fitted. Those who have seen either my most recent New Arrivals video or Meet the Fleet video will know that the loco ran very well on DC while hauling conflat wagons around the test track. But how did the loco crawl? It was usually my experience that locos running on DC performed more poorly when running at slow speeds than they did after they had been DCC fitted, with the notable exception of the Sonic model's Large Prairie. The Class 24 was fitted with a conventional iron core motor, so I wasn't expecting results as good as locos fitted with a coreless motor. While not perfect, as you can see, the slow running results were quite good. There was a small amount of jerkiness at very slow speeds, but overall I'd have to say that the results of running on DC are well above average. This was the 6th time I'd opened up a loco to fit a decoder, and I had the usual complaints about the standard of the documentation advising on how this should be done. The Class 24 instruction stated that the body shell clips over the chassis and can be removed by carefully easing away from the chassis. I know some people have a knack for this, but I don't. For me, body shells very rarely simply eased away from the chassis. To help in removing body shells, I'd love to see at least a diagram showing where the clips are. Anyway, having no fingernails to ease the body shell away from the chassis, I reverted to my tried and tested method of inserting thin guitar picks between the two components. However, I still struggle to get them to slip between the chassis and body shell. So I ended up having to remove the bogies to give me better access. The fact that the bogies could be removed wasn't even mentioned in the instructions. Once the bogies had been removed, and after a bit of probing, I eventually managed to insert a plectrum on either side of the body shell, and it finally yielded, giving me a view of the loco internals. At this point I noted that the fan end of the body shell was at the decoder end of the chassis, just in case it was important when it came to refitting the body shell. Once the body shell had been removed, it revealed the 6-pin decoder socket. I was going to fit a Bachmann 36-568A decoder, which was a decoder manufactured by Zimmo, who are my preferred decoder manufacturer. This particular decoder had once been fitted to my Graham Farish Class 20 before I'd had it upgraded to sound using an ESU Locksound 5 decoder. It was great to be able to repurpose the decoder, and once I'd tracked it down, I was ready to fit it. Before fitting the decoder, I consulted the instructions again, and once again they were very poor. However, they did include a diagram showing where pin 1 of the decoder should be located. So, after gently coaxing out the decoder blanking plate, it was a simple matter of lining up pin 1 on the decoder to pin 1 as shown in the diagram. And as it turned out, pin 1 was also shown on the blanking plate. Unfortunately, the decoder I was using didn't have pin 1 marked at all. but I managed to track down an image on Bachmann's website that showed its location. Once I had this information, I could gently insert the decoder into the decoder socket. I also tidied away some wires that had escaped from underneath the loco circuit board and which could potentially get trapped between the body shell and the chassis. Before refitting the body shell, it was always a good idea to test the decoder first, which meant that I needed to refit the bogies. Bogies usually clip back into the chassis fairly easily, but on this occasion I struggled to relocate them. The second bogie was particularly stubborn in wanting to go back into position. I tried to locate it countless times, but there seemed to be some sort of obstruction that was stopping it from clicking into place. I persevered though, and eventually figured out that one of the pickups had bent into a position that was fouling the worm drive. I administered a small adjustment and it eventually clipped back into the chassis. Once the bogies were refitted, the chassis was then taken to the train room for the decoder test, which was always a nervous time. I gave the loco some power, and was a little dismayed when the loco didn't move, so my nervousness increased. I wondered if the struggles with getting the bogies back in place had damaged the pickups, or maybe I'd dislodged the decoder. I then wondered if I was using the correct decoder address. If you remember, the decoder I was using had come from my Class 20, and I was using its address in my controller. It turned out that Mark's Trains, who had sound fitted the Class 20, had also reset the decoder, so it was now programmed to work on its default address of 3. Once the correct address had been entered into the controller, I gave the loco power again and watched as it pulled away with more than a little relief. I satisfied myself that the decoder was working correctly by performing a few back and forth operations at various speeds, before heading back to the workbench to refit the body shell. Once I was happy that the decoder had been fitted correctly, I could refit the body shell. There was no need to remove the bogies from the chassis to perform the refitting. However, I did make sure that I had the body shell in the correct orientation, with the fan end of the body shell over the decoder end of the chassis, before attempting to clip it back together again. I offered the body shell up to the chassis and it then simply clipped back into position. Back at the test track, I changed the decoder address from its default so that it represented the Class 24's running number. It was then time to see how well the loco ran on DCC. The loco had ran pretty well on DC, but as usual, once running on DCC ran a whole lot better, especially when operating at low speeds and when crawling. All of the jerkiness and hesitation displayed earlier when running on DC had disappeared, and the loco crawled very well indeed. Next, I had a quick running session with the Class 24 circulating the test track, hauling a few box vans. Okay, so that's about it for this episode. For a change, I was extremely pleased with how this DCC fitting went. Firstly, it was the first time in a long time that I managed to complete fitting a decoder without breaking a single part on the model, which was always a bonus. Secondly, while the loco ran pretty well on DC, it now ran much better on DCC, especially at low speeds. So let me know what you think. Have you fitted a decoder to this model? If you have, did you experience any issues, or was it all plain sailing? Alternatively, if you've got any hints, tips, useful tools or techniques to pass on to a fellow N-Gage modeller, or if you simply want to say hello, then please do so in the comment section. Anything and everything you've got to say will be greatly appreciated. In the meantime, thanks ever so much for watching. Hopefully I'll have another update soon. Bye.